Okay, everybody, welcome to another LSA webinar. This time is a kind of a special edition with David Mihm and Alex Porter on the topic of, is automation an existential threat to digital agencies? And this came together sort of spontaneously, which I'll discuss in a little bit, but we wanted to really just have a conversation today about the implications of all the machine learning, automation, AI stuff that's going on in the market, and where Alex and David see it having an impact, and what agencies should do to prepare for the future. Before we get into our substantive conversation, I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping, and then of course promote our upcoming conference, as I always like to do. You'll be able to get access to this in our webinar archive on the lsa.org site. Also, we'll send it out to all the registrants, and you'll be able to watch the replay of it. So, as I promised just a moment ago, the PLACE conference is coming up next Thursday in New York at the Grand Hyatt. It's going to be a great event, everything on location intelligence. We've got some great brand case studies, terrific speakers, some controversial topics, including privacy, what people never tell you about location data. It's going to be a really good show. Lots of different kinds of companies going to be there, brands, agencies, and technology providers, some media publishers as well. It's a pretty diverse attendee list. And then we've also got a special pre-conference workshop featuring Google and Place IQ that's going to happen at Place IQ's headquarters. And that's going to be a rare opportunity to talk to Google and have an in-depth Q&A, get a little bit of product roadmap stuff from them. So if you're in town and you can come, this is free. The conference costs money, but this event is free. If you're an agency, check it out at that URL. So if I were in a room where I could see people, I'd say, how many people know who this guy is? It's Jean-Paul Sartre, who's one of the existentialist philosophers, French, of course. And I thought it was appropriate for him to ask the question, is AI an existential threat to digital agencies? So I'm going to try and set the stage here, and then we're going to bring David and Alex in, and we're going to do something a little bit different. So normally what I do is I invite people to submit questions throughout the program, and then we get to them at the end. But this time, as you guys submit them, we're going to talk about them, because this is going to be a free-form discussion. So as these things occur to you, as you have questions or comments you want to make, submit them through the control panel, and I will integrate them into our discussion. So everybody on this listening to this has heard the benefits, the promises of AI and automation, and here are some of them: efficiency, speed, scale, better analytics, better insights, automated optimization, improved campaign performance, and then of course the perennial freeing the humans to do what they can really do well, and what really matters, and sort of taking the routine and mundane tasks off their plate. So I found an interesting McKinsey report that sort of delves into the impact of automation, and I just wanted to throw out a couple of stats that I thought were pretty provocative. They say that about half of current work activities can be technically automated, and about 2/3-ish of occupations have about 1/3 of their own content that can be automatable. So I want to ask David, David, are you on a speakerphone? If you can go on mute for a second, that would help, because there's an echo in the background. Okay, great, thank you. Sorry for that momentary digression there, folks. So they also estimate that between 400 and 800 million people are going to be displaced by automation in 2030. This is the sort of dystopian view, right? Robots are going to take our jobs. No one will be able to work. The age of the machine, and so on and so forth. The truth is somewhere in the middle, right? Sort of the utopian vision and the dystopian vision are probably both partly true. There will be displacement, but there will also be great benefits for companies working with automation. And we're very close to the conversation here, but I wanted to point out that Google in various ways in its ad products and its analytics is integrating automation. I mean, you guys have all seen universal app campaigns, recently announced responsive search ads, smart ads, local ads, smart bidding, and so on. This is machine learning and automation are pervasive at Google, and especially now in AdWords and display campaigns. Facebook is also doing this. There's a lot of AI and machine learning across the organization, and of course in advertising and optimization, A/B testing, and so on and so forth, ad objectives. And then there are, of course, a lot of third-party automation tools and machine learning tools that can be brought to bear on Facebook campaigns. So we're seeing the two largest platforms go all in on machine learning and automation. Now, as I said at the beginning, what prompted this webinar is an article that I wrote that Alex responded to and David responded to. So I raised this question: are Google Smart Ads going to kill the reseller channel? Resellers being third parties that rep AdWords, mostly the small businesses, but not entirely. And Alex wrote a piece on our blog responding to my piece that, as the headline indicates, his answer is no, but with a caveat, and he'll explain that in a few minutes. No but?
No but, exactly.
Okay. All right, so now I want to let David introduce himself and his company, and then I'll give Alex a chance to do the same, and then we'll get into the discussion. And remember, submit your questions at any time, and we'll take them throughout the conversation. So, David, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Pleasure to be with both you and Alex here. So I'm David Mim. Most of my background is in local search. I spent about 10 years helping primarily small businesses and then later on enterprises kind of figure out not just Google Maps and the 10-pack and 7-pack and 3-pack, but increasingly that seems to be the location that matters. And then reading some of these tea leaves that we're going to talk about today, I kind of pivoted to an adjacent space, which is email marketing for my newest company, Tidings. So we basically, ironically, we try to help automate the creation of email newsletters. And we've got an agency plan that's really affordable that a lot of folks have been excited to adopt that you can check out at this URL. So that's me and that's my company.
Okay, Alex, it's your turn.
Sure, Alex Porter, CEO of Location 3. We are all in on local. Our tagline is everything is local. And we're a digital marketing provider, and we focus primarily in the franchise and franchisee space. And with those companies, we really deliver enterprise-level strategy, so understanding their big-picture initiatives, KPIs, and goals, and then bringing that to life at that local level and providing that local activation across the digital spectrum: search, social, organic, listings, etc.
Okay, and so now our discussion in keeping with the French theme, the le débat or debate. I probably butchered that pronunciation. Anyway, so I think it's worthwhile for us to just define some terms real quickly, because these terms are thrown around in every other press release I see: machine learning, AI, automation. What are the distinctions in your minds? You know, you're not PhDs in machine learning, but what as practitioners, what do these terms mean to you?
Sure.
So I think.
Go ahead, Alex. Go ahead. First. No, you go first.
So I think just in my limited robotics machine learning knowledge, so I think artificial intelligence is really anything and everything we're using every day as we go about our lives. I think whether that's your mobile phone or your various platforms you're using to help you book flights and things like that. That's kind of the artificial intelligence piece of it. And where the machine learning comes in is looking at some of the data specifically in marketing and understanding optimization opportunities, theme analysis, looking at various keyword trends, and then applying that data to perform better. So taking some of that data that the artificial intelligence is collecting and then making use of it in a meaningful way.
Sure, and I would just add, I think that's all accurate, and I think in the context of this conversation, I would look at both automation and machine learning as contributing to increased speed and increased effectiveness of ads. And I think that's speed in terms of delivery and sort of campaign management, and then effectiveness, obviously, getting more clicks and getting more customers through ads. So that's kind of how I would apply both of these topics to the current debate.
And if anybody has any comments, you think that they're wrong, you want to interject something, as well as questions, feel free to submit those. So what do you think are the common myths or misunderstandings here that people are operating under? I mean, there's sort of the vagueness of the terminology or the limited understanding of the terminology, but what do you think are one or two of the big misconceptions that people bring to this topic?
I would say that from our perspective, I think that when it's a term that gets thrown around a little too loosely and almost like a silver bullet to your problems. Like, okay, the marketing's not working. Let's just ramp up our automation and machine learning. And I think that there's a lot that goes into doing this right and taking advantage of the tools and technology that are out there. But it's become a little bit of a catch-all that I think actually does it a disservice in the long run, where you're not really providing a full understanding of what machine learning is or what it can do. And it's unfortunately become just like the great buzzword of this year.
I want to just sort of ask you, Alex, real quickly, and David, feel free to jump in on any of this stuff. What do you think the customer understanding is? You work with a lot of brands that have local franchisees. What do you think the customer understanding of all this is? Do you think people understand these terms? Do you ever hear them in your conversations? Do you ever invoke them in your conversations, or do you think there's just a kind of an opaque black box here for the customer, for the advertiser?
I think if you're talking about the SMB, for us that would equate to an individual franchisee. I'm actually at a franchisee client conference today, so I've actually spoken with about 50 franchisees in the last 3 hours. I am explaining to them what Google is and what the difference between a boosted post and an ad is. The words machine learning have never crossed my lips to speak to these folks, and I think if I did, it would further complicate matters. They're struggling to understand a lead to a sale and revenue. So in my experience with who we're talking to, this is not part of the conversation.
And I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, I think that the business is basically concerned with how do I show up in Google, right? I mean, that's I think the sort of itch that most agencies are focused on scratching. And if I were an agency, I would continue to sort of frame my services in that context. I don't think, to Alex's point, I think, overcomplicating and sort of inducing, I guess it's not necessarily fear, but just in introducing complexity with these terms, I wouldn't see as a winning strategy. I actually wanted to chime in on the sort of myths and misconceptions. It's not necessarily a misconception, but I think that there's also maybe an orthogonal point here, at least from my perspective, with what Google is doing. To me, yes, there's certainly some automation happening with some of these newer ad units, but to me, the real big disruptor that's happening isn't necessarily related to automation. It's actually related to user interface and the ad unit itself in the form of local service ads. So, I mean, this is just a completely different ad unit that doesn't require creative. It doesn't require landing pages. Google is, I guess, automating bid management, but essentially it's a fixed cost, right? So to me, the real innovation and I think the real disruption in terms of what Google's doing and where agencies may be disintermediated actually has to do with UI in addition to AI and machine learning. So that's, I think, an important kind of orthogonal point to at least where I was sort of chiming into to both your post and Alex's on the LSA.
Yeah, so thanks for injecting that. I mean, I think one of the things that I think about that's kind of interesting to me is the why question, which is sort of the third bullet here. I mean, there's sort of a simple answer perhaps and maybe a more nuanced answer to this question about like why are these companies doing these things? Why has Google introduced these different ad units, the responsive search ads? I mean, there are a lot of agencies presumably out in the world that like the expertise that they can bring to keyword selection and ad creative, and Google seems to be taking theoretically in an effort towards simplicity or simplification or improved performance, they're taking a lot of stuff away from people. I mean, and that includes your allusion to the service ads. Why are Google and Facebook investing so much into automation and bringing these technologies to bear on their campaign tools? What are your thoughts on that, both of you?
Well,
I think it comes down to Facebook.
No, you go ahead, Alex.
I think it comes down to performance. I think that those things, the keyword selection, the ad copy, the creative, they're so fundamental to success, but they're also sometimes the most difficult. And if they have additional data points and optimization technologies that can help make those dollars go further for the average advertiser, for the SMB, you're going to see a stronger lifetime value for Google, for Facebook. They want these people to have great success with these programs and continue to advertise and grow their advertising budget. So for me, it comes down to performance. If they can automate some of these things and the advertiser knows that they're getting best-in-class advertising through these platforms and they're satisfied with the results, they're not going to stop doing it. They're going to keep doing it. They're going to grow their budgets, which equates to revenue, and everyone's happy.
Yeah.
So let me just follow up on that. Let me follow up on that, David, and then you go ahead. So do you anticipate that everyone will be happy, Alex? I mean, is this the proverbial win-win-win-win?
Right. No, I think if that holds true, if I advertise and I get my acquisitions at a reasonable cost and I see my revenue go up because of these platforms and I spend more money on Google and Facebook, then yeah, I think that is a win-win for folks. I think where the agency plays into this is that really around kind of connecting the dots between all these platforms. An SMB is very different from a franchisee, and the way that we're able to scale tactics and solutions across multiple locations. So for us, it's more of integrating all these pieces of the puzzle, but I think that the SMB could very well be serviced by these platforms pretty effectively.
David, go ahead.
I think, I mean, Alex and I are in total alignment on kind of the long-term. I think where we see the long-term role of the agency is as a sort of facilitator and connector and advisor of many different platforms. I happen to think that that's not largely what these companies, what many agencies are doing today. I think that there's plenty of, at least at the sort of very small business level. I think at the enterprise level, you have a lot of very, very smart sort of more boutique shops that are doing this sort of one-to-one personalization of marketing campaigns by clients. I think that's happening much less as you get down to the lower cost, sort of mass market SMB providers. And so I think that those are the ones that I think are at risk from all of these trends, the AI, ML, and UI that Google's working on. I'm sort of going more specifically to Google. Frankly, I've followed Google much more closely than Facebook, and actually, I think that Facebook's example with how successful they've been attracting advertisers, especially directly through boosted posts, largely is really what has driven Google in this direction, or at least has been a major driving force in this direction. So, I mean, if you think about the ability for an individual SMB to spend money on Facebook and have it feel like it's doing something for you. It's an incredible difference relative to what Google has historically had, which is go sign up for AdWords. You have to come up with all these keywords. You have to figure out how much you want to bid per keyword. You have to figure out what landing page you want to send people to. You have to figure out what you want your ad to say. I mean, there's all of it. It's like a totally insurmountable hurdle for a lot of small businesses to do all of that stuff in AdWords. And I think that's historically, that has been a win-win proposition for both agencies and for Google is to have agencies either doing that on behalf of the small business or strongly advising them in terms of how to set those things up. And so I think that Google has realized for a long time that, hey, we need a much, much simpler solution, something that is closer to the Facebook boosted post model if we're going to attract anywhere close to the same number of direct SMB dollars. So I think it's sort of a competitive shift from Google to try to get more direct money from small businesses and knowing that they need a simpler product in order to do that.
I think that's a great point, and I think that one of the other things that the Facebook entering the mix in this SMB space has done is that it's actually made Google kind of tighten their belts a little bit in terms of how they set up those campaigns and recommend budgets. In the past, like for example, broad match would be the default. So I'm an SMB, I have no idea what I'm doing. I go in, I apply the keyword, I'm matching to every possible variation of my keyword possible, and wasting 80% of my money. And I think that's a terrible long-term view, and you're just going to get churn and people. I spoke to some people today that were like, oh, I tried Google a year ago, it didn't work, and they don't want to try it again. And I think that's part of what's happening right now and why they're changing the way they're approaching this market and really focusing on effectiveness.
I think I want to sort of consolidate 2 points that you guys just both made. I think, David, you're absolutely right that Facebook is driving some of this from a competitive standpoint. And I think, Alex, your point about churn is really exactly right. People have historically blamed Google for what may be failings of their service providers or their own failings, right? And an interesting piece of data that we pulled from a survey that we just completed but haven't released among small businesses is that, and I think there's other data that reflect this as well, social media now is the leading category for these small businesses in terms of where they're putting their attention as a marketing channel. It used to be the case that they were more focused on SEO and search, and that's still very high, but I've seen this in the last couple of, the last year, that social media now has pulled ahead as the number one area of focus. And I think that's in part because they feel much closer to a kind of intuitive understanding. They can't do a Facebook ad optimization as well. Perhaps you get into some of the same complexity problems there that you had with Google that Alex defined. But I think that there's some stuff in the background that you guys identified, and we're seeing it now show up in the survey data that sort of validates those ideas. Let's move into the impact, because you guys have started to talk about this. So these 2 bullets. Where is the biggest impact going to be felt? I mean, you already sort of started to suggest this, and then sort of in the small business, sort of the mom and pop sort of segment versus franchises versus brands. That's sort of the spectrum. You've got a brand in the mix with a franchise, but you still have a small business customer, and then brands that are sort of owned and operated stores. Where do you see all of this stuff playing out in the most significant way, and in what form?
David, I'll let you go first this time.
Okay, sure. Sorry. So as I was saying, I think it's much harder for the sort of larger agency that is working with a number of different, individual small businesses. I think it's going to be much harder for them to compete with some of the things Google's doing. Just as an example, like let's say you've got a individual roofer who's been spending $1,000 a month on AdWords. Well, even to have a little bit of campaign maintenance, you're going to have 10% of that going to somebody's time to manage campaigns. And then you need to make some kind of a margin as an agency. So let's say that you're taking a 30% margin, and then you've got another 10% cost. So the roofer then is only spending $600 really on AdWords of that $1,000. And what I see the local service ads doing is like, look, I can even if these are only 80% as effective as a sort of really well optimized individual AdWords campaign where I've got a human being at my agency who's helping me optimize this thing. Even if those local service ads are slightly less effective, you can still spend a lot more money as a business on actual ads and getting more customers. And so that's where I see the biggest risk. I mean, I think when you can scale that expertise, as Alex was saying, across 100 franchisees at the same time with the same improved creative and improved landing pages and all of that stuff, your cost per lead is still probably going to be very, very competitive with the sort of human intervention at that level. But I think that the individual small business, the agencies who are selling primarily to individual small businesses with lower budgets are going to be the ones who are going to be most impacted.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one of the things that I want to make a little bit of a distinction to is around kind of some of the platforms that exist to manage these programs, and mostly in a bit of a SaaS model versus the agency that is putting some manpower behind it and person power behind it and providing that strategy and the integration. I think we're going to see those two areas impacted differently. If you speak with Google and Facebook, they will flat out tell you, if you are just reselling what we do, like, you're not going to beat us at our own game. We have very deep benches of engineers and talent creating new products and new ways to do this, and that is a short-lived business model if that's what you're going after. So I think that the folks that are just doing that will need to change what they're doing, their pricing, the amount of margin they're taking, perhaps, to stay competitive in the space and really provide value beyond just repurposing the data and the tools that Google and Facebook are offering to anyone.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in there really quickly, Greg, I know that you did a panel at the LSA event actually in San Diego basically a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, where you did a survey. I can't remember, unfortunately, who the platform provider was that was sponsoring the survey, but of the respondents, 60% of them were using AdWords Express to manage campaigns. And so to Alex's point, if that's all you're doing is reselling Google's simplest tool, you aren't adding any value, and that's exactly who Google is looking to automate and disintermediate out of their customer base. So that would be my argument, and I think Alex is spot on.
Well, so this gets into the question about the resellers and their response. I mean, in our earlier discussion, sort of in deciding to do this webinar, we talked about the desire that people have for service. So even though these self-service tools are out there, there's still a desire on the part of many customers to have a service component, to have a human to talk to get some human to explain things to them. And I could envision in one view of the world these automated tools. I mean, you David, this sort of is trying to challenge what you just said. These automated tools. And we didn't talk about AdWords Express, which has been around for a long time, but kind of sucked for a long time because it was broad match and didn't work. Now, presumably, these are the successors to that, and they will work because of the sophistication of the technology. But I could imagine a reseller who's trying to do stuff at scale using these third-party tools and just having a monthly call on top of that, and hiring very differently. So sort of clearing out some of their labor and just having sort of accounts or service advisors getting on the phone and saying, hey, here's how your account is performing, and here's some charts, and do you have any questions about that? And really being pretty opaque with the end customer about what's going on behind the scenes. What do you guys think about that?
I don't know if it's possible at scale. I mean, we intentionally don't work in the SMB space because the time and effort it takes to manage a single location with a single owner is cost prohibitive. If you look at David's example of 1,000 in spend and 400 going to to the entity, like that might not even be enough at the end of the day, because these guys are essentially the CMOs of a one location or a few location facility, and they need a lot of support. And the SMB, they're not just looking at their AdWords or just looking at their Facebook. They have a website. They have a Google My Business listing. They have a CRM tool. Maybe they're on HubSpot. There is a million pieces that go into this digital marketing puzzle at the SMB level, and it takes a lot of effort and energy and service and understanding to do that. And the skill set to do that at scale is just frankly cost prohibitive, and that's why we've not focused on that area and focused on the franchisee space, where we can leverage economies of data across all these locations, because we have not been able to figure out how to service the SMB space, and I think your Google and can say the same thing. They've been, that is their huge revenue opportunity out there. If they could get every SMB in the world to spend money on their platform, that would be amazing. But that's why they keep trying to reinvent how they go off after that market, because it's a very hard market to service.
Yeah, and I think that there's definitely some value to the. I mean, Greg, you're right that there's some value to the small business in being able to talk to a human. I question whether the margin is comparable to what agencies are making on performance right now in terms of versus customer service. That would be the first point. And then to Alex's point, we've seen Google go on an absolute tear with feature development and releases within Google My Business in the last year with Google Sites and Posts and Q&A, and there's just all of these features that they're releasing that really, in my opinion, are doing a pretty good job of getting businesses back engaged with Google My Business directly. And so I think that they're really opening up Google My Business as a direct sales channel to SMBs. And yeah, there's going to be a certain number of them that are willing to pay for a monthly call, as you said, with an agency. But I think that there's going to be increasingly, again, at the lower end, I think increasingly a lot of these guys are going to be trying something like home service ads for themselves, or the latest and greatest AdWords Express for themselves, and seeing a reasonable enough return, and the reporting from Google is good enough that they're going to get by without an agency, at least for specifically focusing on paid search. And so I think, also to Alex's point, like if you do want to evolve as an agency, regardless of who you're serving at the sort of franchisor level or the individual SMB level, I think that taking a more holistic look at all of their digital marketing pieces and helping them leverage the automation that's possible in each of those channels, I think that's really the best place for long-term differentiation and sustainability of business model.
So let's talk a little bit about enterprises for a second, because we focus largely on the small business space. So there's a lot of challenges that agencies face around margins, around transparency. There's a lot of stuff going in-house in enterprises now. What do you see happening in that segment? I mean, you just laid out, and Alex did earlier, sort of a template for overall strategy consulting and connecting the dots between all these different complicated channels and platforms. Certainly, that's a role. But what's your advice to the agency servicing the enterprise? Are they at risk of things going in house now more with the stuff, or no?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. There is a risk of things going in house. It seems to be cyclical. Like we'll have a period of time where it's in house, and then it's all let's use partners, and then there's the conversation around let's use one partner for everything, or let's use specialists for everything, and that also seems to be a little bit cyclical. I think just the advice for agencies in general is focus on performance, focus on having a strong foundation in data and understanding of the data, and don't just kind of focus on one thing. I think that's where we found a lot of our success is really starting with understanding their business strategy, their business goals, and their revenue goals, and then fitting kind of those tactical pieces onto that to move the needle. being able to describe that entire journey. You need to be able to look at, how search impacts social and how listings impacts conversion rate on paid, and just all these different pieces of the puzzle that happen in many times a complex sales cycle. And I think that's really where an agency can supplement an in-house team very, very well. I mean, we're seeing that when you do have at the local level, if you have search and social, your search conversion rate goes up. And we're seeing that. I think Facebook just released a study on that internally a few weeks ago, but we're seeing that in our live data, and getting kind of those individual businesses to understand that combining the two of them has an amplification effect. And if you just look at social alone, it doesn't look maybe fantastic, but when you look at the two of them together, instead of siloed, it's the performance is great. And that's where we think that we really bring the most value, is seeing this big picture view of the digital world and then bringing these individual tactics to life in a really meaningful way.
What about margins? You guys have, David talked about margins, and Alex, you sort of reinforced that. What should we expect in terms of how automation, machine learning is going to impact margins, if at all? What are your thoughts there?
I think that there, in the marketplace right now, are some higher margin products that potentially would shrink based on some of the efficiencies that these tools provide, and would maybe allow, or they stay the same and allow more kind of service and support. I think that at the end of the day, the goal for a good agency is to provide good performance for your client, and if you're taking too large of a margin, it eats ultimately into your end client's margin on their end. So there's obviously we all need to make money in this world, but I think doing it in a way that is respectful for everyone is kind of our preferred method.
Yeah, I think that's, I think Greg, I see one of the bullet points on the slide is, around transparency. And I think that's, I would encourage all agencies to start moving in the sort of more transparent direction. And, where there is automation happening, tell customers, we are using whatever, home service ads or AdWords Express or whatever. And, we are taking X margin on that. And I would start seeking out products and services that your cost of goods sold is lower on, if you want to maintain a higher margin, where you actually are able to charge for, added service value or, human expertise, those kinds of things. And today all of my focus is on the small business market, but on the enterprise side of things, you asked about sort of specialists earlier, and I've got a number of friends who do sort of, specialized SEO, whether it's, Andrew Shotland at Local SEO Guide, or my buddy in Portland, Matt Brown, does a lot of news SEO consulting. I think specialists are still really valuable at the enterprise level, because, spending 10 or 20 hours to, dive deep into server logs and that kind of stuff, that can make an enterprise hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars with the volume of traffic they deal with. Spending 10 or 20 hours on the server logs of a small business just isn't going to have that impact. So I still think there's a role for sort of specialized expertise, and I think, at least from what I'm seeing, that the boutique guys are doing quite well in this new environment, even with all of the automation that's happening on the sidelines.
One of the interesting things that we've observed to some degree, and this is part of our tech adoption index kind of analysis, is there's some of the traditional small business aggregators are sort of trying to migrate into the SaaS world a little bit, because they see selling ads or reselling ads as unprofitable and sort of a high churn business over the long term, not a great bet. And so they're trying to add services like CRM or other services, email marketing, et cetera. Some of them are moving even further afield to get a kind of a SaaS annuity and have a higher margin product and appeal to the market. Do you see some of this automation pushing people in that direction, or do you think that that's going to be a very hard migration for some of the folks that have sold marketing to move into SaaS?
I think it's a hard migration, and I would actually tweak what your characterization of what they've been selling. I think that a lot of these guys have actually been selling advertising for most of their existence, at least in the case of sort of print media companies trying to make this transition. And so there's definitely a level of sort of sales knowledge that needs to happen in order to be able to make the transition to a more sort of holistic SaaS model. And I think, to your earlier point, like one of the reasons that SMBs are gravitating towards social is that there's this sort of, intuitive understanding of what's going on. And so if you're an agency, a traditional print agency who is looking to migrate into something, that your sales reps can understand and explain to folks, not necessarily something that's like so complex that they can't even sell it. I think that that's probably part of the problem with sales reps trying to sell SEO or even paid search in the past is like the business owner actually can see right through the sales rep trying to explain a concept he or she doesn't understand. And so I think that the move into adjacent spaces into more of an annuity makes a lot of sense if your sales reps are able to sell that convincingly.
Anything to add, Alex?
I think that makes sense.
Well, so Google has developed over the last, let's call it, decade, really, maybe a little bit less, an elaborate network of third-party resellers. Partners from newspapers and Yellow Pages publishers to other large entities that have a lot of small business customers to help extend their reach, to service that population, because as you point out, they weren't having success penetrating beyond a certain point with self-service products. Now it would seem that some of these relationships, or not the relationships, but some of these entities are facing, a bit of a crisis, as we've already talked about. What should they be doing? These large guys. I mean, you've talked in one form or another about this in the past few minutes, but what would be your advice? You're sitting across the table from some of these folks. What do you tell them to do?
I think that David's point about transparency is really relevant here. I think that it's really important for the SMB to understand really what they're buying and what they're getting for that. And I think that would be pretty disruptive to some of their models from a revenue standpoint. But I think that if the lack of transparency and kind of, in some cases, pretty high fees continue, that it's going to be it's not going to bode well for kind of future churn rates and new customer acquisition.
Right. I mean, in addition to the complexity we talked about earlier, I think one of the reasons that so many SMBs have soured on paid search is that, once you build in the management fee that the large media organization is taking, it definitely doesn't pencil out to just on a cost per lead basis. And so I think that I absolutely believe that ads on both search and social play an essential role in an overall campaign. But I think being transparent with the business around the ad margin you're taking versus the service margin on things that do require human management, I think that's a much healthier, more sustainable model and sort of sales arena to get into. And I think that Andrew Shotland, I mentioned earlier, he was at the ADP show last year, and one of the YP.com speakers there was saying that selling search, which to those guys meant paid search, was actually impacting their churn rates across the board for all of the other products they were selling, because the businesses were seeing that it wasn't working for them, right? And so they were actually not only just canceling the paid search campaign, but also canceling their print ads and anything else they were buying. So I think that that there may be a little bit of a sort of ripping off the Band-Aid pain, moving to a more transparent model, but I do think that that's a healthier long-term way of doing business that will continue to earn you customers over the long run.
But I think if you leverage these tools properly, like if you leverage these tools that are coming out to make the campaigns, make the media more effective, there's an opportunity to kind of pass that efficiency along to that end customer, whether that's making those budgets just generate more leads, which will equate to more revenue. But there's also the opportunity there to just take more margin. So I think the decision to kind of pass the efficiencies along to your client base is an important one.
Yeah, and directly stretching those dollars further, I think, a good example, Google is really not at all focused on sort of post-sale CRM, long-term relationship building. So,
right.
Converting someone from an ad into a purchase, but then extending the lifetime value of that into a repeat customer, that's a great spot for an agency to get into. One of the reasons I'm so excited about email marketing as an aside is, that's really what it's designed for. But I think that going beyond just that first touch point, which is where Google is really, really strong and can bring all this, rich data to bear, I think that's a great spot for an agency to extend the value of those AdWords dollars that the either SMB or enterprise is spending.
And so one of the things. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go finish, and I'll speak after you. Go ahead, Alex.
Okay, so just as it relates to the agency and the automation, we're obviously talking a lot about the tools that are available at the SMB level, but that's not the only area that Google and Facebook are focusing on. They're providing us with a lot of great tools that make us able to manage these campaigns at scale. We're kind of an unabashed Google shop, so we use Google Data Studio to pull in CRM data and analytics data and Facebook data and pretty much any data that we can to be able to create this kind of holistic data approach to see every piece of the puzzle. And then we leverage DoubleClick's tools and their scripting and their bid management and their budget allocation. And, the scripting that you can do within Google and AdWords and DoubleClick is pretty incredible. So they're providing us tools at more of an enterprise level, but it allows us to apply these rules at the local level and makes budget management really effective, and time of day and day of week, and it rains, so let's raise the budgets and those sorts of things. So there's the ability to leverage these tools not just at the S&P level, obviously, but at kind of our, we'd like to think that we're really sophisticated in digital marketing, and these tools help us be just that much better across Google and Facebook are coming out with some really great tools for us, as we speak, to be able to do this as well.
One of the things that has historically been done, the position that's been taken by some of these entities servicing the small business market is a kind of budget cutoff or budget threshold. So because of the margin issues that have been identified already, we're not going to service anybody who's spending less than $1,000 a month or $1,500 a month, because that'll give them enough budget for their campaigns to succeed. It gives us margin. Do you see this making that kind of choice more essential, and if so, what is the threshold, do you think, that will have to exist below which everybody's going to just be in the sort of self-service diaspora?
Well, Mike Blumenthal,
go ahead.
I was going to say Mike Blumenthal and I discussed this in the context of SEO services, but I think it holds true in the AdWords, sort of just paid ad space as well. There's sort of a bifurcation happening where, there's a lot you can do using free tools and just stuff that doesn't cost you money in the sort of sub $500 range that you can effectively set up an automation that would take the business owner, too long, and they wouldn't be able to figure out how to do it. You can set that up for them that can just basically run itself in the $500 to $1,000 a month range. To me, I think, and then there's also a lot of value you can add to higher spending advertisers in the let's say $5,000 to $10,000 a month and up. I think where this really hits is the middle of the road advertiser in the $2,000 to $3,000 a month range, where it's like, okay, they can put a lot of that budget into some of these automated ad products themselves. They're going to be somebody who may be a little more demanding in terms of the level of service that you're giving them. And so I think, from my standpoint, I would say agencies who are largely dependent on AdWords, AdWords reseller revenue, I think they need to increase their minimums if they're going to be able to make a margin on their human time. maybe as high as, like I said, $5,000 a month minimum spend. But I think Google's going after the lower end guys pretty aggressively.
Yeah, for us, if we were working with an individual SMB, I couldn't even really hazard to guess what we would have to charge. But with the franchise systems that we work with, we have some locations spending $250 a month. And I would say probably our average across the system, all of our clients is less than $1,000 a month. But the only way that that's feasible for us is that we are able to apply a lot of our keyword builds, ad copy, creative analysis, and optimizations across the board. Obviously, there's some customization in there, but we spend a good chunk of our time on kind of lots of optimization and then ongoing customer service, where we do as many things in group settings as possible to educate broadly and answer as many questions as possible with those spend levels. That's really the only way that we're able to make some margin and provide good service.
Okay, so
and leveraging some of these tools.
As we sort of get toward the end here, if you had to sort of name one or two things that are where agencies are really vulnerable. I mean, there's been some discussion of this. What's the area that's really going to get impacted most directly by machine learning, increasing sophistication of automation over the next couple of years? Where is that really going to have the biggest impact from a negative standpoint?
From an agency standpoint, I would say that the biggest impact would be entry-level opportunities for people entering an agency, because many times those entry-level positions are the ones that are doing the work that will be automated. From just an agency owner-operator perspective.
So it's going to impact hiring and staffing. That's an excellent point that we didn't talk about at all. So say a little bit more about that, about how all this stuff impacts your decision-making around staffing and hiring.
Sure. So I would say, 5 years ago when we were managing hundreds of thousands of local listings by Excel documents, and then hours and hours and hours a month, and today it's a push of the button, those people that were doing that at the time are no longer needed. Now, they've obviously grown up in our agency and have other positions, but what that means today is we're not looking for 10 people next month to basically shift data from one place to the other. And instead, what we're doing is we're looking to grow our team and educate them and getting them smarter, better at what they're doing, paying them more along the way. But I think it does, looking at a big picture, that, my kid that's 11 might not have an account coordinator position available to him in 10 years. And what does that mean for him? Well, hopefully he's going to build an app and I'm going to retire. So that's my plan. But besides that, that it's interesting for the kind of the digital job market of the future.
David, any thoughts on the?
Sure. I think that there's, I do think that that Alex is right, that the sort of grunt level jobs that had been Excel driven are largely going away. I guess I'd take a 45-degree angle to that and say, if your agency is able to evolve into a more holistic, to evolve your service offerings more holistically, right? So you're going beyond just reselling AdWords and building landing pages into things like email, like CRM, like SMS marketing, whatever it is, right? If you're able to extend your bundle, I think that there is still a role for sort of junior level people who can come into the agency with a sort of broader expertise. I think that the flip side of that is that your sales folks who are, at least in my experience, tend to be, people who have been around a little longer. I think that they're going to have even more to learn, right? Which is going to be a really hard thing. So I think I guess I would say any agency that's investing heavily in education of their own people, I would continue to do that, and I would focus more on the sort of strategic training as opposed to the maybe tactical training that you may have used to do with things like Excel docs.
Right.
So when
you look at, just real fast on that, like when you look at general trends and people that talk about AI and machine learning, what it means for the future, like the growth, the jobs that are going to be critical are going to be the ones that are more creative thinking and strategic and relationships, and those are the things that robots can't replace yet. And that's where we really are focusing on. Like, we want to be that strategic partner and have these really great relationships and have a big picture thinking about the digital world. And that's where we really see ourselves fit in, and then use these tools to allow us to drive performance at scale.
So sort of we're at the end here, and I want to get your very concrete tactical advice for the people listening and those that will subsequently hear this on demand. What are 2 or 3 concrete things that agencies or those acting in that role need to do today to prepare for this future? But before you answer that question, and let's go David first and then Alex, somebody asked, is it a good time or a bad time to be an agency? So answer that question first and then give your advice. David, you start, and Alex, you finish, okay, and you'll get the last word.
I would say it's a worse time to be an agency today than it was 10 years ago. I think that there was a lot of incredibly complex stuff happening 10 years ago for which there wasn't great automation. And so you could make a margin on a lot of things that required very little work if you knew how to do them. I think that the sort of, silver bullet opportunities are largely gone, and I think that that Google and Facebook are going more directly after the sort of low-value stuff. So I would say it's harder today to be an agency than it was 10 years ago, at least be a profitable agency. And in terms of like concrete things, I think, we've talked about them on the webinar. I think increasing sort of 2 things that are tied together are realize that your AdWords margins are going to decline, your AdWords reseller margins are going to decline, and becoming more transparent about what those are, I think is number 1. And then number 2, to sort of backfill that lost revenue, I would say get more strategic and look at the more holistic digital marketing picture. Look to other services like social, like email, like websites that together can bring you that same sort of, or the same margin that you're currently making reselling AdWords at a broader level.
All right, so I'm going to say it's a great time to be a great digital agency. I think that things are more complex than they were 10 years ago, with every day something new happening with Google or Facebook or any other of these various channels that are out there. And to be able to provide a really holistic, strong performing program for your clients takes a tremendous amount of brains and creativity and technology. And for us, it's fun. We have a lot of fun doing it. It's just a very complex environment, but we're able to see the results. We're able to see the revenue improvement, and so that feedback loop is incredible. So I'm gonna say it's a great time if you're great at it. And then for tangible takeaways, I think leverage the technology that's out there when you're looking at margin improvement. Charge a fair price, make your margin on performing really well and being efficient in how you do things. And I think that the other big piece for me is just the kind of the ongoing education. It's such a fast-moving, complex digital ecosystem out there that if you don't spend your time staying at least looking at all the different waves that come in and then deciding which ones to take, you need to dedicate significant time doing that.
Okay, on that note, thanks everybody. Great discussion, and thank you all for attending, and those in the on-demand world, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, David and Alex.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Thanks, guys.